It's a pleasure to be here in Antigua. I must again express my public appreciation and thanks to the government of Antigua for inviting us to participate in this important initiative, as well as the World Bank. And so I'm actually here. My substantive capacity is with the Maurice School of Business and Management in Kingston, the University of the West Indies. But the capacity in which I'm here is with this emerging coalition that we call the Caribbean Open Institute. I'll talk about that a little bit. So, it's my first time in Antigua. I think, and it's only been a few days, but it's as close to paradise as you can get. With maybe the possible exception of Jamaica. But it's pretty nice here. Yesterday when the minister asked me, have you been to Antigua before? And I said, no. He said, shame on you. It's been too long. And you know, it really has been. I should have been here before. And I truly wish that I had come here during the glory years. I wish I had had the opportunity to go to the Antigua Recreation Ground and see Viv and Curtly and Andy playing cricket. And those were the times when West Indies, on the back of Antigua and other countries, dominated the world. And we have some notions in the Caribbean Open Institute that, again, we can dominate the world in the emerging knowledge economy. We'll talk about that a little bit. And when we get to Q&A, I really do want to ask you, what happened to Antiguan cricket? But, you know, let's leave that for then. Let me tell you a little bit about the Caribbean Open Institute. I really do want to focus, because Andrew's done an excellent job of drawing the broad sort of canvas on open data and what it is. And it really is a phenomenal thing that has happened in the space of 3 or 4 years. I mean, as someone who has been a technologist for the better part of 25 years, open data has gathered a momentum both in the political and the technological space intersecting in a matter of 3 years. That's quite phenomenal. And I want to focus more on this from a Caribbean perspective and with some of the opportunities that we see and some of the things that we've been working on through this Caribbean Open Institute. But let me tell you a little bit about what this is. It is, and we like to think of it as a regional coalition of a number of institutional partners. University of the West Indies, my two colleagues here, Patrick from UA in St. Augustine, Trinidad, and Amparo from Fundación Tigre in the Dominican Republic. And a whole bunch of institutions that have come together to explore this notion, or we have a strong belief in the notion that in the emerging knowledge economy, the Caribbean can be extremely competitive. Because notwithstanding the constraints we have in some of the traditional factors of production, our knowledge capital and our cultural capital is second to none. And that if we take the opportunity to exploit technology to harness those things, there are huge opportunities for us as a region. And so this initiative, we sort of came together and said, well, one of the things that's going to be critical, one of the critical pillars in the emerging knowledge economy is going to be open data. And so how can we position ourselves and the region to take advantage of that opportunity and position ourselves to build some capacity to be able to collaborate with governments, as we're now doing with the government of Antigua, as we've been doing in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, in Trinidad, to facilitate the open data movement. And for the moment, the work that the Institute is doing is being sponsored by the International Development Research Center, which is a research organization out of Canada. And so there are key things that we're doing now, and I've been doing over the past year and a half, building institutional capacity. So when governments like Antigua or the Jamaican government or the St. Kitts government say, well, this open data thing looks interesting, I want one of those, I want to try this. At least we have some capabilities to help in that initial movement. So to provide support for developing policies, standards, and actual tangible initiatives around open data. And so some of the things we're doing now, and I'll talk about those a little bit, are some interesting things in areas like agriculture, exploring some opportunities in education and in tourism. And the other important thing for us is, and I say this because I'm an academic, but it's quite important, we have to understand what is the value proposition for the Caribbean. Because at the end of the day, this thing takes resources. financial resources and human capital. And there are many other challenges that we have in the region, and we must be able to demonstrate that open data can deliver value, economic value by way of growth and innovation and things like that. So we're actually developing and pursuing a research agenda that investigates and can inform the kinds of strategies that governments adopt in relation to open data. Because as Andrew said, there are some interesting things, right? Open data, for me, the fundamental premise is that if we accept, and I think we all do, that we're on the cusp of, or are in fact transitioning to a knowledge economy, then data becomes the new currency, the new raw material. And so if government is one of the entities in societies that has all this data, then releasing that and making it open actually provides fuel for much of what can happen. And as Andrew said, the interesting thing about data, unlike oil or other factors of production, that it is using it, it's not diminished by using it. In fact, the value of data increases with use. The more you use it, the more value you extract from it. So there are some interesting economics around open data that make it compelling. And one of the critical things that we'll talk about is the role that software developers have to play. Because putting open data up there is a necessary but not sufficient activity. It's now, if you think of software development, if you think of data as the new raw material, as a new fuel, then you can think of software developers as a new production capability. And the more of those we have, and the more we can exploit and harness them to build indigenous kinds of innovations, then the more value we can extract from this. And Andrew spoke a little bit about some of the value estimates. We want to translate those to the region. What does open data mean to the Caribbean in economic terms? One of the things is jobs. Open data has literally spawned the emergence of a new economy. That's called the apps economy. In the US, this is 450,000 jobs that did not exist in 2007. Just based on people taking advantage, and Andrew gave some excellent examples of that. Taking this stuff and building things which can make governments run better, deliver services more efficiently, and building an app and putting it in a store and selling it for 99 cents. If 1 million people buy that app for 99 cents, then that generates economic activity. Right? So this notion of jobs, which is a very important conversation in our side of the world, and I'm sure for you guys is quite important. So there's a strong intuition as to why this thing should be important. But one of the things that we've found is that, as we've looked at this in the last year and a half, sometimes the open data discussion becomes quite abstract. So, well, it sounds like a good idea, but what does it mean to me? What does it mean to the average citizen? And so I'm going to go through a couple of examples that we've been working through to try and give you a sense of the possibilities. And one of those is agriculture. Agriculture is pervasive to us across the region. I always ask the question when I have these conversations, what is the value of agriculture to your economy? I think the answer we had today, Darren, was about, what, 5%? 5%. Yeah. But, even though it's 5% in terms of how we measure things like GDP, one sense is when you look at things like jobs, when you look at things like food security, when you look at things like the linkages into other sectors, its importance is far more. So here's what we've been doing with agriculture. So we have an agency in Jamaica called the Rural Agriculture Development Authority. And this is really the agency that provides extension services to farmers. So about 110 extension officers, we have about 170,000 farmers across the island. And these guys go out into the field and they provide support to farmers. They advise them on what to plant, what fertilizers to use. But one of the important things that they do is that they collect data. So every time they go out and they interact with farmers, they collect data about the farmers. So all farmers need to be registered. You collect data about the size of the property that farmer has. You collect data about, okay, this guy is planting half an acre of tomatoes, he's planting an acre of pumpkin plantings, what have you. And all of that data gets fed back into this system called ABASE. And it's an incredibly substantial data set which the ministry and RAD use internally for their production planning, for their reporting on the agricultural sector, for deciding how much to import, right? And it's quite useful for them. And we said, well, but we think we could get more from this if we open it up. and get some other persons outside of government to start doing things with it. So we started this pilot project. This was our first proof of concept of open data. What is possible if the ministry gave us this data and said, well, let's open it up and let's get a bunch of creative developers, most of them from the university, to build stuff around it. And we targeted these sort of 4 areas, what I call spatial visualization, because agriculture by its nature is geospatial. Right? The best way to think about agriculture and farms is to look at it on a map. That makes a lot more sense than looking at a report with a list of farmers or a list of production outputs and so forth. And so the first thing we did was visualize the data. And so you can go to a website now and you can see this map of all the farms across Jamaica. You can drill down into districts, into parish, into region. You can click on a dot and you see basic profile of that farm, the farmer's registration number, name. We categorize them, the location, and the size of the property. Well, that's simple enough. But at a glance, this is much more representative in terms of information than looking at a list of farms. Right? So that's interesting. And now I can query this. So I can say, well, show me all farms greater than 50 hectares. And you filter that and you see the distribution of farms, so that we readily discover that 80% of the production comes from 15% of the farmers. Right? Lots of false small farmers, but really less than 20% of all farmers are doing 80% of the production activity. So, I mean, those are some interesting kinds of analytics that you can do. We can also look at it in terms of crops. So this is, again, my color display. So you'll see up there, and this is actually an application that's on the web. You can actually go there and play around with this. So we're looking at all crops across the island, and again, the farmer, the location, the crop, the size of the property, and the size of the crop area, and the date that crop is expected to mature. And so I can drill down and say, well, show me all the farms that are planting cassava. You guys still use cassava in Antigua? Do you make bamis and things like this from cassava? Okay, so you understand what cassava is. Right, so again, and this is just interesting. This is just taking data that you have, the government has already, and taking some people outside of government to build applications around it. But the other thing that we can start to do with this is kind of business intelligence analytics. So using the same application, I can say, well, let's take sugarcane and give me a distribution of sugarcane production across the island. So it's now looking at sugarcane production by parish, right? And so therefore you see that most of our sugarcane production takes place out in the western side of the island, which is Westmoreland and Trelawney. I can look at it another way. So I want to look in a particular parish and look at the distribution of crops. So I'm looking at the parish of Trelawney and I see that yams, everybody knows what yam is? Of course. Okay, so yam production is 28%, but the production of hot peppers is 55%. Now, when we were presenting this to the Ministry of Agriculture, I came to this slide. There's something significant about Trelawney. Everybody knows Usain Bolt, right? Maybe 60% of Jamaica's successful Olympic athletes come from the parish of Trelawney, including Usain Bolt and others. And people have been studying this thing for the past 4 or 5 years. And it's interesting. There are people who have come and studied it and said, well, we think it's yams in Jamaica that cause your athletes to run fast. So when I put this up, I said, well, according to this statistic, it's probably hot peppers why people run fast, not yams, because the distribution of hot peppers in Trelawney is actually 55%. And then someone in the ministry said, yeah, but there's something wrong with that data, because yam is actually the highest production in Trelawney. But that raises a very important point. Whenever there are errors in data, opening it up is the best way to clean up data. Because if there are errors, people will find it. Transparency is the greatest way to enhance the integrity of the data. And so these are just some interesting things that we've done with that data in business intelligence. This is looking at price of bananas across the island, so that you can see the different price distributions. It's most expensive in Kingston, St. Andrew, and you can get bananas cheapest out in St. Mary, which is out in the east. Right? And this is price data that is collected by a group that goes out to various retail points on a weekly basis and collect price, which gets fed into some system. And so we took that and we made it open data, and the guys did some visualization of that. So these are interesting things, right? What this demonstrates is we're taking data that exists. We're not doing anything more with the data in terms of collection. We're just making it open, and a bunch of people have taken it and made it far more valuable and usable by a number of persons. So that in addition to the Ministry of Agriculture, which previously were sort of the custodians and the persons who use this data, now you can think about current farmers or people who are thinking of going to farming can go to this site and make decisions about what to plant. You can think about agri-processors who are trying to find out where different sources of agricultural production are. You can think of food distributors, you can think of importers. One of the interesting ideas that came out, and Andrew made the point about unexpected outcomes. We had this application at there's an annual trade show called Denby, which is the largest agricultural trade show in the region. And so we had this demonstration, and people were coming around and farmers were saying, wow, this is great. How do I access my own information? And a couple of school teachers came by and said, but you know, if I had something like this in the classroom, what it would allow me to do in terms of teaching kids about agriculture and where different things are planted across the island. So for instance, we always talk about St. Elizabeth being the food basket. Just visualizing it would make it so much more powerful in terms of kids grasping what this means. And so, use it in the classroom, right? And so that's what we call an unexpected use. But it goes beyond that. And Andrew spoke about apps, right? So it's not just a matter of taking data and visualizing it and making it interesting. It's now building interesting apps. And one of the things that we built was this thing that we call the mobile agro assistant. So the extension officer who goes out in the field to serve farmers really is what we call a knowledge worker. And he's most effective if he has information when he's out there. And so we built this app, so the guy goes out on a tablet and the screen literally looks like this. He can search for, he can say, show me all the farmers who are within a 1 mile radius of me, or show me all the farms, or show me all the people that are planting tomatoes, and query it right from the application. And so it gives him a kind of geospatial view of where he is and who is around him. And that makes the guy, extension officer out in the field, that much more effective in terms of servicing farmers. So that's one example. Let me quickly give you another example which has to do with budgets. Budgets are a common thing across all governments. All governments come up with budgets which essentially say these are our priorities, these are how we are allocating public resources to serve the needs of the country. And invariably, you know, budget debates are these exercises in political debate and, you know, discussion, and they mean very little to the average citizen. Yeah. And the government of Jamaica, like many other governments, publishes the budget each year on their website as a series of 85 PDF documents. All right? So that's information that's being published. The issue is, what do I do with that? I mean, I can go and download these PDF documents and read them, but it means nothing. And so we're having a conversation about how to make this budget data open. But in the meantime, to demonstrate the potential of that, I had a couple of graduate students who probably hate me. We did this last summer. Download every single one of those 85 PDF documents, go through, cut and paste the budget lines from them, and make data of it. And then we dump that into this platform called Open Spending, which now gives us the opportunity to do an incredible amount of visualizations about what the budget means. So this is one visualization which, it's not a pretty picture. I mean, it shows, for instance, the huge challenge that we're currently having with debt servicing, right? That big red thing there means that over 50% of our budget resources go into servicing debt. And you'll see how much is allocated to education and public order, safety and health and general public services. And you know, a couple of students said to me, you know, I never understood the budget until I worked on this stuff. And it now means something because we all understand the notion of a picture being worth 1,000 words. And these are just some other examples of what you can now do with that data, once you've made it open, once you've given persons access to it, you can take that budget data. Last year it was $625.9 billion. You can look at how much of it is recurrent budget versus capital versus debt servicing. And you can drill down into that recurrent budget and see how much of it is for, agriculture or public utilities. So it makes the data a lot more meaningful to a lot more people. That's another example. Last example, tourism, because tourism is something that's very important, I'm sure, to Antigua, it is to Jamaica, it is to the Caribbean. Tourism is, is a critical economic activity for most of our countries, based on, and I say perceived, availability of free resource inputs, sand, sea, and sun. And I say perceived because they're not free, they are exhaustible, and they can run out. Right? But for the moment, let's say that that's a large part of why tourism is significant. So it can earn foreign exchange, it can provide jobs, and it can provide economic stimulus by linkages into other sectors. In Jamaica, I don't know what it's like in Antigua, but tourism contributes 16% to GDP. It is the highest contributor, followed closely by remittances. That's an interesting other conversation. But there's some key critical issues here. One of the challenges that we have is that the tourism sector is dominated by large operators. And so there are many small operators, but they struggle with the challenge of being visible because they don't have the resources to be presented in the traditional, conventional channels where tourism products and services are exposed, right? And so if you think of tourism, just like agriculture, my idea of agriculture, if you shed for the moment the stereotype of agriculture being the farmer with a hoe going out into a field, and if you think of agriculture as a knowledge-intensive sector, then you can use a whole bunch of data and other information type solutions to address issues in agriculture, such as breeding and larceny. Tourism is the same. It is an information-intensive sector. And if we can take open data as a catalyst and build applications around that, we can address some of the challenges that we have in tourism. And so actually doing this project now, we're working with a number of the data sources in the tourism sector. The tourist board, who collects all this data every time someone comes into the country from immigration about where they're coming from, how long they spend in the country. The Tourism Product Development Company, which has all this data about the tourism assets. So all registered hotel properties, all of the attractions, Dunn's River, craft markets, plus registered operators in this sector, such as the official transportation service providers and so forth. And so we're looking at all this data and the possibilities for a whole bunch of different apps. So imagine a tourist coming to Jamaica, and as they go through the airport, they can download a tourism app. And on that app, you can access information on all of the tourism properties or attractions. You can get peer reviews about, well, this guy visited this property and said it was great. And so you're much more informed to make decisions about how you want to experience this product. And so it provides a lot of opportunities for niche tourism. A lot of people who come to Jamaica who are not that interested in sun, sea, and sand. They want the ecotourism product. They want to go up into the Blue Mountains. They want to go out into the east of the country and experience a different kind of tourism. And they should be able to access that kind of information, and open data facilitates that. And so the idea here is that the value comes from a number of things. It's not just government putting data up there. That's a catalyst, but it's now us, civil society, the developers, the domain experts, the other interests, taking that data and creating value from it, so that you get this kind of what I call the open data ecosystem, where all of these people are going to make this work, right? So when the Antigua and Barbuda government completes the study, decides that, wow, this looks great, it's not just a matter of them now publishing data. It's all of these people getting involved in making that data create value for the economy. So I just want to spend a couple more minutes and focus on one category in here, which is what I call the developers, the software developers. There's an event that we had 2 weeks ago called Developing the Caribbean. It is the biggest open data conference in the Caribbean. It's a multi-country event that takes place This year took place in Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Cuba, Dominican Republic, although they've delayed theirs a little bit. And we were having conversations as well with Barbados, Suriname, and St. Kitts, but they didn't come on board this year. And this is a fantastic event. If you think about, if you go back to, I know when I say West Indies cricket, it's a bad word, but if you go back to the 70s and 80s and think about the power of that regional coalition, think of all the developers across the region getting engaged in building stuff, building applications that make sense for our context. And that's what we do at this conference. And you can go to the website, developingcaribbean.org, and take a look at some of the interesting stuff that happened.